All right, we're good.
What's happening, Mark? How are you?
Good.
Dude, thank you so much for coming on, man.
Yeah, happy to be here.
So, for the listeners that aren't familiar with you, can you let everybody know, like, your podcast, what you're about, and I kind of wanted to get into your history, well, and from there.
Okay. So my show is called My Family Thinks I'm Crazy. You can find everything at myfamilythinksimcrazy.com. And for about 3 years now, since 2020. And yeah, I've been researching this stuff for almost a decade or more. And Skull and Bones and Yale happen to be my area of I hate to say expertise because I'm nowhere near an expert, but it's definitely close to home and something that has um, sort of beckoned in a way, and maybe we can get into that and how I first encountered all this stuff. But yeah, I just feel called to research this stuff, and it's a very interesting subject. I think it connects to, I mean, so many different areas that I'm sure you guys are familiar with, topics we talk about on this show and other shows. And so yeah, I'm a big it's hard to say fan of a group like Skull and Bones, but I'm very fascinated with their history.
Absolutely. Okay, so I got a question for you, and we do this with every guest. What's your favorite color?
My favorite color is green. I like green. I like
Oh,
being out in nature. So, depending on where you live, for me, there's a lot of green when I'm out in nature.
right. We all do this because it's kind of like cool exercise we started to do where when you start to talk to these people, or like for me, I've listened to you for quite some time, and I really appreciate podcasts. Like I like that, I know you book like tinfoil and stuff, and they have great. It's different, like you actually have like almost like some of them are like almost 2.5 hours, and it's just so in depth, and there's so much information. And I just really enjoy your podcast. But the big thing with the color is like we look at the color and people's favorite color, and we try to look at esoteric and if it registers with the guest or not. So um, I also wanted to know too. I've been doing a lot of study. You know what? Let's get into Yale. How about you tell us your thing, and then we'll get to the Utah thing. Bring in the Skull and Bones, Utah and Yale, how they have the two separate branches, but they try to act like they're not like associated.
Utah?
What's that? I'm in Arizona, right
Oh,
directly south of it. I'm like northern Arizona.
okay. Yeah. I hate to say that Utah is exactly my specific knowledge. I had a guest on, Ryan Burns, that talked to me about it. So
Yeah.
folks who are curious can listen to that episode. But as far as I know, Yale and Skull and Bones, their group, the Skull and Bones by that name, it wasn't the first group by that name. There was one in Germany, and after Skull and Bones was formed in 1832 at Yale College, there's a great deal of information that shows that they went on and founded whole universities. They didn't just start other Skull and Bones clubs. I mean, these guys, after they graduated Skull and Bones Knights, that's their official title. But after they graduated Yale and went on to do things in their life, it's just so astounding when you look at the list and you ask yourself, well, is it a coincidence that these people all became politicians, CEOs,
Mm.
extremely wealthy, tapped in? I mean, obviously they're already starting off with maybe a big head start because their parents are wealthy enough or they got scholarships to go to Yale. But when it comes to the knights, the actual graduates, they, yeah, more often than not, find themselves at the head of institutions like John Hopkins University, the University of California, Berkeley, even Stanford University had some skull and bones people at the founding. So yeah, I wouldn't be able to comment on other groups by that name aside from the one at Yale, but it doesn't surprise me. I would actually be less inclined to think that a group like that would go by the same name. I feel like Skull and Bones, their whole operation, is to seem like a hydra, like multiple heads of the same body, but maybe you don't necessarily know that these all are connected, right? So even at Yale, you have Skull and Bones, you have Book and Snake. Those two are just reversed when you look at the title SB or BS. It's a reversal, and not to mention the locations are actually kind of reversed. Like they're exactly 3 blocks away from each other and on the same street and on opposite sides of that street. So it's like mirror imaging. So there's some maps I could show you guys. We can get into like what Yale looks like. But as far as other groups by the name of Skull and Bones, I would be less inclined to think those were official Skull and Bones groups, because Skull and Bones has such a reputation. I wouldn't be surprised if people have mimicked it. But as far as Ryan Burns's research goes, what he told me was that the Skull and Bones in Utah has some really strange connections, and there might be a reason to believe that they are connected to Skull and Bones. So that might be an exception, but I wouldn't be surprised that there are other groups by that name at a number of colleges, because students create these kind of groups just all the time. So if you're not that creative, you want to sound cool, maybe just call yourself Skull and Bones, right? So, but how many of those groups are actually doing things like robbing graves or going on to work in this very upper echelon? I mean, the list of things that Skull and Bones is associated with, I mean, it goes beyond success and like politics and government. It also steps into crime and the underground world and you know
Wait,
gang.
okay. Let's go back a little bit. You said robbing graves. What do they do, or what's the purpose of that?
So when Skull and Bones was basically broken into, right? Because before they were broken into, I don't think anybody realized what was inside of their clubhouse. They just thought that this was some kind of boys' club where they get together and keep secrets, but nobody really understood the weight of their secrecy. And when people broke in, they found all sorts of skulls, like skeletons, skulls, like bones and whatnot. And not just that, but people associated with the Geronimo through tribal relation or through ancestry have claimed that Geronimo's skull was taken, and there's evidence for this. Prescott Bush talks about doing it. He allegedly robbed a grave of Geronimo in Oklahoma with 2 friends and brought Geronimo's skull back to Skull and Bones headquarters at Yale as a sort of trophy. So that's what I mean by grave robbing. Why they do that, there's multiple esoteric explanations for why someone would want a skull, but that doesn't mean that we know that's the type of thing that's being practiced here. It could be as simple as when the college started, they needed people to gather cadavers for medical experiments, people who had passed away that they can pull out of the ground and use to examine. Obviously, with so many, religious folks at the time, nobody would have consented to that. So they had to do it illegally. Nobody would have wanted their, loved one who had recently passed to be cut open in some school for even if it's for higher good. Now we think of things much differently. People have organ donor emblems on their license, but back then it was considered like vampirism to go and do anything with a dead body. Like they would think you're a witch or a vampire or something, you know, right? So, and hey, there might be some truth to that, but yeah, I think the grave robbing aspect is weird. It seems to have a spiritual warfare connotation where, especially with Geronimo, you know, Geronimo's skull was taken only a few years after he died, and the Native Americans were still in a war with the United States. I mean, people forget that only 100, less than 200 years ago, there's a war here in America between the Native Americans and the army. And I mean, I don't think it ended until what, Wounded Knee, which was essentially a massacre.
Yeah.
And after that, they just brought everybody to prison camps. So, and that's where people live now. If you're an indigenous person, outside of a few exceptions, most indigenous people here in the States live on reservations. So this is a war, make no mistake about it. And the people at Yale, who are also connected to the Browning Rifle Company, the Winchester Repeating Rifle Company. I mean, these are the weapons that won the West, right? That's what they say. They won the West with the repeating rifle. That was invented in New Haven by people associated with Yale. So there's a war between the Americans and the Native Americans, right? And Geronimo was one of the fiercest defenders of that Native American sovereignty. So when he died in captivity, you know, it was like a big FU to the natives who were still fighting that battle to go and take their leader, take his skull and put it in a basement somewhere. And that's really like how I confronted this whole situation, because when I was in college, I was just exploring New Haven, looking around, seeing all the weirdness. I ran into a Native American who was in New Haven as a homeless person at the time, because he had recently got out of prison and decided, you know, I got to right my wrongs. I got to turn my life around. And he did that in a spiritual way by connecting with his ancestor, who he had learned had had this terrible crime committed against him posthumously, right? And this isn't a qualm just in the Native American culture. This is something that most cultures would consider, you know, a heinous act to take someone out of the ground and steal their body parts without their loved one's consent, right? I mean, this is despicable stuff. But Skull and Bones did this. Yale University being connected to Skull and Bones, and there's a number of ways I can prove that, make that evident. But when Geronimo's skull, when they found out it possibly was missing, they approached Yale to try to get it back, and Yale was like, well, yeah, we have it, we'll give it back to you. And instead of giving this tribe the skull back, they gave them a child's skull, like a baby
What?
skull.
Wow. Like you're not going to notice it.
Like they're not going to notice it, but also why would they have that, right?
Yeah, like where did you get that one?
Yeah.
You know what
So
that reminds me?
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Well, we're probably thinking the same thing, but it reminds me of, there's a church organization here in Northern California called Bethel, and they do something called grave soaking, where they'll sit on top of graves and they'll like do a prayer to soak in the energy of the person that's buried in there. So they'll do it for like George Washington and like random people, because they think they can get some sort of like energetic connection to that person by doing it. And they're a Christian organization, but I mean, it might have something to do with that along that lines. I don't know.
yeah, you know, that sounds to me like mediumship, which is definitely an element. But I think what Skull and Bones is involved in is maybe more accurately described as a form of necromancy, which I don't think any Christian would stay at a church that was practicing necromancy unless they're going by another name. But hey, we do eat the
It's
body
a
of
weird,
Christ.
yeah.
We do eat the body of Christ when we eat the wafer, and we drink his blood when we have the wine, right? So
Right.
I
Well,
grew up.
I think they were like linked into like some sort of cult. Like they're saying that it's more of a cult than an actual like Christian organization because they do a lot of like mystical things like that, where
Yeah,
people are
well,
like,
that's just fundamentalist Christians versus open-minded Christians. You have
mhm.
that happening all over the place. But I think that's a good point. I wasn't all that familiar with the grave soaking concept, so I'm glad you brought that up. Um, when it comes to New Haven has a really weird geometry. So New Haven was designed to be this 9 square grid, and in the center they built a park, a green, with 3 churches on it, all facing the east. And they built the square just big enough to fit 144,000 souls, 144,000 people. So at the end of
Whoa.
times,
That matches all the different things like you see in New Age stuff where they talk about the 144,000 in the Bible, the 144,000 people, etc. That's wild, that number.
that's why they did it. They're
Okay.
Christians, they
Yeah.
believed in the Bible, but they believed in a Christian apocalypse, but like they had this apocalyptic thinking, this mindset that's still around today. There are Christians today, Jehovah Witness or whatever, that tell you it's the end of the world and we're all sinners and we have to repent. But this was an idea that literally built New Haven. Like they designed that into the landscape, and they buried all these people in the town center behind the church. That's just the common practice of the times. Build, graveyard behind the church. Now this got overflowed and, just overpopulated with people. So they had to relocate the graveyard to another part of New Haven, and when they did that, they created the first graveyard of its kind in America. Before this, they would just bury people in a field under grass. They might have headstones, but it wasn't like the way we have cemeteries today, where you have a path and individual plots and big, ornate, huge, obelisks and all sorts of other Masonic, types of images to keep you safe while you're resting in your final resting place. you know, I I was never like a creepy cemetery type goth person, but you brought up grave soaking, and the graveyard is a big part of this whole thing, because Skull and Bones, like, they call themselves bonesmen. That's like just another term. There's multiple things they call themselves. Another thing is the
Brotherhood of Death. Do they go by that too?
the Brotherhood of Death, the Order.
No.
I think the Brotherhood of Death might be assigned to them, but who knows? Maybe they call themselves that. But they usually, in their writings, their own writings, they call themselves the Order. But the term bonesman goes back to England, when they had cemeteries or graveyards, and they would have people who would dig the graves and whatnot. And these guys were called bonesmen because they would, bury your bones. And there's all these weird sort of folk magic stuff associated with the bonesmen. There was also the highwaymen. There was also the, toadsmen. Like, there are all these
Okay.
weird.
The highwaymen like Johnny Cash and Chris Christopherson and all
Yeah,
them.
yeah. Well, that's the kind of
Wow.
amazing thing about America, when you start to learn like the folk magic and the occult esoteric history. It's like, it's everywhere you look. It's just coded under this layer of pop culture. So people hear highwayman and they think Johnny Cash, but they might not realize that Johnny Cash got that term from somebody who originally, came from this term in England. And these highwaymen, they were considered like they would sort of help the souls leave the church and go to their grave, right? That was the
Mm.
point. Like, there would be a road in between the church and the graveyard. So you have these different people playing these different roles, and all of this has been kind of forgotten to us. Now we have like the priest who does everything when he gives your final. And I'm sure it was like that then, but now it's a little different, and I think like the guilds, you guys know what a guild is, right?
Yeah.
Mm.
The guilds, people think like woodworking, stonemasons, right? And obviously the Freemasons came out of that, right? People would specialize in crafts and stuff, but there were other guilds that didn't necessarily specialize in a craft, but they specialized in a trade or a practice, and grave digging slash grave robbing slash grave, you know, I don't know any other grave verbs, but that's the that's the gist of it. Is like there were people called bonesmen way
Yeah.
before skull and bones ever was a thing. So what you have to understand is they're like playing into these different archetypes that they want to associate with. And New Haven, New Heaven, right? It's even built into that, like New Haven, New Heaven. It's kind of implying that there will be a new heaven on earth, as it says in the Bible. So we're going back to these biblical terms a lot, but let's throw a wrench into it, because it seems like everybody in New Haven, for the most part, is Christian
Mm.
outwardly. But what I found is there's all these Freemasons and Rosicrucians running around, and they call it the Elm City, which the elm tree has an association with Saturn. And they
No.
also have that 9 square grid, which I pointed out before. And that
Oh,
9 square grid is also a symbol of
cute, right?
Saturn, the
Yeah.
cube. So Saturn is being invoked in New Haven. Why? Well, there's multiple explanations for this. And, I recently talked to a Freemason who had a very interesting understanding of Saturn and how it's more than just the Grim Reaper. But when you learn that the Skull and Bones men, upon their death, when they're buried, other bonesmen who are still living present them with their grave with a sickle and what is it, a shaft of wheat. So those are both Saturnian symbols again. I mean, Grim Reaper, what does he have? He has a scythe. What do you use a scythe for? Cutting wheat, right? And
Mm.
Saturn's all about work, hard work, harvesting your hard work. So, and there's like a death aspect to it, but it's more like material. And that's important to consider when you look at the kind of alchemy that Yale's been associated with. It right on their logo, they have this word that symbolizes the black stone and the white stone. Okay, again, more biblical stuff. Aaron from the Old Testament had black stone and white stone on his breastplate, and this was like an amulet that gave him these magical abilities.
Whoa, dude, that's like the book The Alchemist, when what was it? Melchizedek or Methuselah gave him the black and white stone and
Mhm.
told him when he asked his question to pull it out, and based on what stone he pulled, that's the answer he'd get in the guidance in his journey. That's wild. I never realized that with Aaron. I never realized
Right. And that's the thing. It's like I'm just diving into all this. So for folks listening, this might sound like I'm going a little all over the place, but there's so many connections. I'm trying to just
that.
create
Yeah.
a salad here
Mm.
of ideas that maybe will generate some questions in your minds and the listeners' minds. And but when it comes to like Yale, it's important to remember that Yale's the second um, Ivy League university, second oldest Ivy League university of its kind. I mean, the College of William and Mary technically is the first. That would make Harvard the second and Yale the third. But
Yeah.
as far as like Ivy League proper schools go, it's the second, because Harvard was the first, and William and Mary's not an Ivy League school, as far as I know. I could be wrong, but either way, it's either second or third, and it's very old. I mean, 1700 is when they decided they were going to start this college, and they didn't build their building until 1717, which curiously is the same year Freemasonry announced its existence, which we know
Mm.
they existed before that, but they chose 1717 as their coming out party date.
Mind you, it's like the college was founded 76 years before we even became a nation.
Right.
And a big thing too, we're talking about the skull and necromancy. It reminds me of Rosicrucianism and how they had supposedly John the Baptist's skull. And same thing, right? They would do different things, different rituals with John the Baptist's skull in different settings. I don't know, but that's like the stories that go. I think it's Rosicrucianism.
Yeah. That I've heard the Knights Templar doing, so maybe
It's
it's
Templar. I'm
them.
sorry.
But
Yeah.
you could have found something that, says the Rosicrucians did. I wouldn't be surprised. They came. We're told they never existed, but as far as history goes, they came about after the Templars were gone for 300 years. So if the Templars went underground, they might have needed 300 years for people to forget about them, and then they just changed their name, because the Rose Cross, Rosicrucian, that just means Rose Cross, is kind of similar to the Knights Templar emblem. And also, you can't help but say, like, there's a commonality obviously between what they're doing. I mean, they're essentially doing the same things minus the Holy Land.
Yeah. It reminds me too, like, I mean, they took something that derived in England, spread to Germany, and then brought it from Germany here. And it's like Sam Tripoli says it. He's like, Germany lost World War II. The Nazis just went to Russia and to the United States. So if we were to take Skull and Bones and say it gets too hot and it gets too much knowledge made, like you said, all of those different groups could just be derivatives of, just to disseminate. It's like Pfizer here, and you got all these different shell companies to protect the main kind of thing. It's kind of what I look at. And another thing too is I'm not familiar with like the campus of Yale, but I lived in Fall River, Massachusetts for like 6 years. And so there's lots of like really old cemeteries. And like you said, most of them are like families that they buried their ancestors in the backyard. And the headstones are just pieces of limestone that have literally weathered for hundreds of years. And so I know there's a museum that's really close to Yale, and they have like some of the greatest crystal collections in the world. So it's like amplifying all that energy. How couldn't it? You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah. That's the Peabody Museum. And I don't know if that crystal collection is still with them, because they do like change the exhibits around a bit.
Oh,
But I don't know. Actually, no. Here, I'm on their Wikipedia page, and it says, yeah, they have crystals. I've been to that, and I've seen the massive crystals, and I kind of thought to myself, well, geez, they put these here. How are they going to move them? They're huge, right? So I think they're still there, but yeah, there's been a lot of construction at the Peabody in the past 5 years. They built a whole nother addition to the science buildings nearby. So uh, they did some work on the Peabody too. But yeah, those crystals are really cool. I would even say that, like, in a place like New Haven, we'll look at the geology itself. When they chose to be in a place like New Haven, I don't think they, you know, forgot to take that kind of thing into account. I think that was probably on the top of their list, right? Like, geology is very important wherever you go, because it can tell you about how well you'll do farming. It could tell you how rich you might get mining, other things like that. So when you look at New Haven, even today, back then it probably looked pretty similar minus the buildings, but there are these two red mountains on either side, East Rock and West Rock. And in between is this like floodplain with these two rivers. So it's really a perfect place. And Connecticut's main river, the Connecticut River, used to flow in a long time ago, thousands of years ago, down the channel that is now a different river into New Haven. So New Haven's harbor is very deep because it had this, river running into it for a long time. Now the river rerouted to a different place that was, again, thousands of years ago, Native Americans, they have a story of that event, which is interesting because we're told by geologists it was a long time ago, and they say it was a meteor, but the Native Americans, they said that a giant stomped his foot right where the river now bends and changed the course of the river. And what's weird is the
Hmm.
stone that's there that they that the giant's foot smashed, right? You know, if that's a giant's foot, it'd be interesting because there's a bunch of brownstone there. And if you've heard Guns N' Roses, Mr. Brownstone, if you're not like an East Coast person, like
We've
Brown,
been dancing with
yeah,
Mr.
yeah,
Brownstone. Yeah,
Brownstone, that's like a building, right? So in New
yeah.
York City,
Mm.
like people live in brownstone apartments. It's like a class thing, you know.
There's a
Upper
lot of
class.
DC too, right?
What's that?
There's a lot of them in like Washington DC too, right? There's like a
Yeah,
brownstone
brownstone.
section. Yeah,
And this type of brown granite, I mean, it's not, I don't think it's rare, but it's definitely not abundant. And they have only, probably only a few places where it's readily available. And this is one of them, which is interesting to me because another Connecticut stone, the pink granite, is used in the Washington Monument, the Lincoln Memorial, and the Statue of Liberty's base.
Hmm.
And Native Americans say that that's actually a giant's body. That pink granite's a body of a giant that got killed in a battle with thunderbirds. So, yeah, there's all these old stories that connect back to Connecticut having this sort of weird esoteric role to play. So I don't think it's a surprise that, you know, Freemasons, Rosicrucians, and these types who are mystically inclined would choose a place to build their college. Like Yale, the ministers that founded it, yeah, they were Christian, but they were a type of Christian that was way more mystical than maybe your average Southern preacher is today, you know, aside from maybe the guys who hold the snakes. But yeah, I think that, you know, people underestimate that because they think, oh, New England had Puritans, and the Puritans, oh, they were Christians and they were prude and they were very chaste and wicked, you know. And that's true, there were those types of people, but at the same time, like at the beginning of America, the 1700s, when people were coming over here on boats for the first time, I don't believe that.
yeah.
I think pre-Columbus there were Europeans coming here, but they just don't
Mm.
talk about that as much. But when the accounted for Europeans were coming over here, like they were escaping Europe's basically very strict rule. So in England and in Europe, they believed in the king, one religion, the king's religion. That's it. Anybody else, you know, we're going to fight you. There's all these wars. I mean, we can go on and on about all the wars that went on in Europe at that time. France, Spain, the Dutch, England. So there's a lot of different factors. And a lot of the people that came here were like, hey, we don't like being oppressed. We want to do what we want to do. So, like folk magic, witchcraft, like all these things that were going on in Europe, they flourished in America because there was less oppression and more freedom. That's changed as time's gone on, but like America from the get-go had this very esoteric, mystical sort of flair to it.
Mm.
And that's why we have so much history that connects to that. I mean, the witch trials and whatnot
Mm.
is kind of, it's they're beating a dead horse over there in Salem talking about the witch trials, because really there's so much more beyond that situation where those women got hanged. You know, like there were alchemists who were healing the whole state. Like the governor, one of the first governors of Connecticut, he was an alchemist who would mix these potions together. And all over the state, people were like, yeah, we love Winthrop, he's our guy, he heals us when we're sick, he fights, you know, fights for our rights and all this great stuff. So, you know, there
Mm.
were people who were like taking civil roles and making America what it is today, who had those types of mystical, metaphysical values. So it's, to me, when I look at Skull and Bones and kind of how they made it to Yale, I start to wonder if it's kind of like some kind of faction that split off, and you had maybe like the more you know, hate to use like the cliche, but maybe there was like a more liberal, free loving type faction. And then there was a more conservative, we want to make money off of everything faction. And these factions battled with each other. And, you know, Skull and Bones' German sort of origin is also weird because Germany, you know, that wasn't a country. I mean, Germany's younger than the United States, right?
It's like Bavaria or something, right?
Yeah, it was. I mean, we call it Germany now, but like back then, yeah, there was all these different city states and all these different monarchs and rulers. So I started to wonder, like, maybe there's some kind of occult, you know, German secret society that said, like, hey, we don't like the French secret society or the American secret society or even the British secret society. So we're going to go and we're going to invade, you know, one of America's higher learning institutions and start recruiting some of these guys to our side, right? I mean, that if I was in that situation, that seems like a strategy I would employ. I'm a weird guy. I've been reading books my whole life. One of the first books I ever read was The Art of War, and that's exactly what they talk about in The Art of War is, you know, how to use spies and how to use infiltration. And you know, that book is thousands of years old. So people have been doing that kind of stuff way longer before Yale ever became a thing. But you know, Yale has the first American spy.
Yeah, it was, oh no, was it Nathaniel Hale?
Yeah,
Yeah, that's right.
which is interesting because his name Hale rhymes with Yale.
Yeah.
Yale's a name. It's the guy who gave Yale its name also gave Yale a bunch of money, which is why they named it after him. But he just so happens to be a slaver and a drug smuggler. Like he was connected to the British East India Company, which was bringing opium to China and fighting this war with China, which we're still sort of reeling from in
Yeah.
a lot of ways with the fentanyl crisis. So, I mean, this stuff all connects. And like these students who go to Yale, they pride themselves on how, you know, open-minded they are and how they're going to save the world because they're so inclusive and they love everybody, but the institution that they're benefiting from is utterly hypocritical. I mean, it made its money off of slavery and poisoning people with
Yeah.
drugs, right? So, and they're
In
blind.
the name of God.
Well, yeah.
Hey there, fantastic listeners. Have you been dreaming of that sweet house with the perfect Southern California vibes? Well, get ready to meet your real estate game changers, Jennifer Larson and Nicole Rankin, the dynamic duo from the Top Results Group at Remax Top Producers. Let's get real for a moment. Navigating the diverse landscape of Southern California's housing market can be quite the adventure, but fear not, because having the right team by your side is like having a secret treasure map. And trust me, who you work with matters more now than ever before. Now, here's a little personal story for you. When it was time for my family to make the move in SoCal, guess who I turned to? Yep, you guessed it, the Top Results Group. They not only found us a house, but they found our family a home where every morning is full of promise and every night's like a cozy retreat. But here's the real kicker. Jennifer and Nicole aren't just top-notch realtors. They're like your savvy friends who happen to have the experience and negotiating skills of true real estate veterans. Their dedication, their knowledge, it's like having your very own real estate insiders. So, whether you're a first-time home buyer, a growing family in need of more space, or ready to sell and move on to greener pastures, don't even think about going it alone. Head over to www.thetopresultsgroup.com and see how Jennifer and Nicole can turn your real estate dreams into reality. Trust me, you'll thank me later. Reach out today for a free no-hassle consultation. Call 951-221-3774. That's 951-221-3774. The Results Group, outstanding agents, outstanding results.
And
All of it. God.
that's the thing. It's like, you know, with the divinity school and God, yeah, there's this sort of aspect to religion that that kind of appears that's it seems more like a form of government, you know. It feels
That's a
more
way
like
to control.
yeah, as a way to control, like they kind of lost, grip of what it's all really about. And I don't think Yale's the only place where that's happened. That's happening all over the world. But yeah, I think it's weird that, these students that go there now, they espouse such a high level of morality, yet their institution is utterly immoral, right? So
Mhm.
yeah, I kind of went off on a rant there. What kind of questions can we go with now?
I got a couple, but Marisol, do you have any?
My whole thing is just, okay, so what is the purpose of it? So say like, someone gets tapped on the shoulder and they're like, hey, come join Skull and Bones, right? What is the purpose of all of what's the recruiting purpose? What's the purpose of like going through all of this and like join a secret society other than like, being a part of like a certain percentage of the world? I mean, what's the purpose of it?
Well, the people who founded Skull and Bones, they had a mission in mind, right? And the mission would exist with or without Skull and Bones. It would exist with or without Yale. I mean, people, no matter what time period you look at, they always want power. They always want to be in control, have the most, right? So it's essentially an effort to sort of curate the best people for that job all into one boardroom so they can accomplish that goal most efficiently, right? So they're vetting the Yale students and saying, okay, well, which students are, moldable? Which students would play well into our hand? Which students seem like they have, assets that are worth something to us? And over generations, over hundreds of years now, I mean, Skull and Bones started in 1832. They've recruited the best of the best of the best, especially back then. I mean, when they first started, Yale was only one of a dozen schools that people would go to, and it was top one or two next to Harvard, depending on what you were learning, right? Depending on what subject you were going there for. But yeah, I mean, essentially, it's a way of creating a network. Networking is so important now in social media, entrepreneurship, and all that kind of stuff. But these guys were onto that all the way back then. They knew about networking, and Freemasonry was alive and well. And in 1832, there was a big scandal with Freemasonry, and the whole nation was like, we don't want Freemasons. They're corrupt. They're playing games. They're practicing nepotism. They're not letting, they're not fair to anyone who's not a Freemason, right? So people got upset with that, and Freemasons had to kind of either go public, stop being secret, or change their group name, make another group, and go underground, right? And Skull and Bones is kind of essentially that. It's like Freemasonic in some ways, the brotherhood aspect, the initiation aspect, it's essentially Freemasonic, but it's not. And why would they do that? Power, obviously, control, right? They wanted, but when you get into the details of what actually goes on, they're trying to initiate someone into this other way of seeing the world. They want the people that come into Skull and Bones and leave Skull and Bones to leave thinking that they're better than the average person, or just really any person, even people in their own family. They want them thinking, no, you're superior to them. You're chosen,
Yeah. They
and
want to be a part of the family, not your family.
well, and this type of ego, I think, it's a type of like delusion that they cultivate in people in order to make them, I mean, we could say from our perspective more psychopathic, but from their perspective more effective, right? Because their goal is a psychopathic one. It's to control the world, right? Like this is what these people want to do, and they've gotten a long way at that. I mean, right now our chance against them is the internet and communicating with each other and elevating our consciousness so that this type of thing can't go on. But when you look at what's happening, right now in Maui with the indigenous people who own land there, and they have basically been, whether this was made to be a disaster or it was an actual attack with some sort of weapon. I mean, who knows? But it looks like all evidence is pointing to
Attack.
they did everything to make it worse than it could have been rather than stop the problem when it started, right? So, and yeah, I think it's all connected. I think that when people ask themselves why the world's getting so crazy, it's like, well, I think people are waking up to what's going on, and it's going to get crazier as people sort of wake up to that in their own way or fall further into ignorance and reaction mode. But why do secret societies exist? Because with great power comes the need for great secrecy, right? Like, I think
Mhm.
that's really what it comes down to. They can't have everybody knowing that they want to rule the world. And who knows, maybe it's not even like this villainous thing. Maybe they think they're doing the right thing. I mean,
Mm.
that's a big part of it too, is like these people might think to them like, hey, we're following what God wants. God wants us to make the world so crazy that he comes back and offers his final judgment, and the sinners go to hell and the saints get saved. Like, that's what it says in the I'm paraphrasing quite a lot, but that's essentially what it says in the parts of the Bible that everybody really focuses on when they start thinking about apocalypse, right? Forget exactly the
The veil, right? That's all the word
Mm.
means in etymology, right?
Well, and yeah, the word apocalypse definitely isn't what everybody imagines, but yeah, I think that's part of it, is they believe in the end of times and they want to bring the end of times here because they kind of see themselves as hell's angels.
Mm.
So like they're ordained by God to do devilish things in order to bring about the end times,
Right.
because they'll be seen by God as good for bringing that about, right? Because, oh, the end of times, that's ultimately a good thing. It's just from a certain perspective, right? I mean, it all sounds really sinister if you're not familiar with like the rhetoric of maybe Jehovah Witness or whatnot, but yeah, I think it's a type of thinking that infects people, like, have you ever met somebody who's convinced that the world's gonna end? It's kind of oppressive energy to be around them, right? Like
Mm.
they want you to think the way they do. And if you don't, they're quick to move on and forget you even exist. And they might even call you like a sinner or something. I mean, there are extremists in every religion. I'm not picking on the Christians here, but I think apocalypsism, millenarianism, which is like the correct term for it, I think that type of thinking is it's like a type of parasite, or like even maybe a better way of describing it is kind of like a snowball effect. Like once you can get like, or even a pyramid scheme, right? Like you have one
Mm.
person that starts it and you just get so many people in on it that by the time they all realize they've been screwed, the guy who started it made bank, or whatever
Oh,
the sick motive is, right? So
Mm.
I,
Like
I
promise you something and then just keep like feeding you and feeding you and feeding you. I did this course. I'm gonna say it was like 7 to 10 years ago. I don't know if you heard about it. It's called Your Wish is My Command by Kevin Trudeau, and he comes from the Skull and Bones. And what he teaches you is like how to vibrate at a higher frequency so that you attract the things that you want to attract to. And he references the Skull and Bones a lot, and a lot of the things that they practice while they in order to achieve things. So like one of them was like they would keep someone in a coffin for 24 hours and then they'd put them at the highest building and then open the coffin right when the sun was rising so that the sun hits their third eye and then just like opens up their mind, and then they can like manifest whatever they were trying to manifest. And I know that like Trump was part of that organization and stuff like that. So they do all these crazy like rituals, and he kind of teaches you that. And I learned a lot of stuff from him, like for example, like rebounding, like cold plunges and stuff like that before people were doing it with a, now people are just doing it, but it's like doing it with a purpose. But he talks a lot about that. But he also went to jail for being kind of like a scam artist. Like he would always like keep promising you things. And at the end of the day, you're like, okay, and unless you get it, you get it. If you don't, you're just going to keep buying into his courses and not really getting anywhere with it. So it kind of almost sounds like what you're saying, kind of like a pyramid thing, like they're promising you something to get somewhere that you should be, but really, are they in control of all of that, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, that's the second really interesting point you made that I was slightly unfamiliar with. I'm gonna look that up. Kevin Trudeau, and then you also talked about bathing, right? So, wow, yeah, thank you. I appreciate you saying that because I've never heard of Kevin Trudeau, and I'm eager to find out, what, because I know not every Skull and Bones graduate, so to speak, has gone on to be like a CEO and like a great person,
Yeah.
or at least seen as a great person by society, because they do frame themselves always.
Well, it's kind of great too, because he went to jail supposedly for like tax fraud or something like that. Like, and they were saying that he was scamming people, but he did write a book called uh, like I don't know, it had everything to do with like curing cancer naturally and obesity naturally and stuff like that. And then after that, they put him in jail for that. And he just recently got out. So I mean, he's doing things on YouTube and stuff again. But I don't know if it had anything to do with that as well. But he did kind of like keep funneling people, like, oh, buy this course, buy this course. So it's kind of like, a little gray area on that. So a little bit of truth, a little bit of scamming. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know how many people who'd been in Skull and Bones that would talk about it. So, I mean, he could just be making that up to get attention, but I'm gonna look into it. And if he's on YouTube, maybe he'll want to interview. I
I
might have to talk to
Awesome.
a former Skull and Bones member. So thank you. I'll let you know
Yeah,
what
he
happens.
has a lot of good information. He learned from like kung fu masters and all kinds of people, and he shares a lot of information. He doesn't share all of it. He'll be kind of secretive on some things, especially like books and stuff like that, that you can get. He had an organization called Jin, where you had to pay in to be into it, but once you paid in, you got access to a bunch of courses and books and meditations and all kinds of things. I thought it was cool for the time where I was, at that point, I was growing and I was learning about manifestation and, you know, all of that. So it was a good time for me to learn that, but I don't know, the whole jail thing kind of threw me off.
Well, anytime someone claims to cure cancer, the FDA can, like, I don't know, commit them for a crime, right? So, but what kind of crime is that, right? I mean, you're
Right.
trying to kill people. So, but yeah, that is weird. I would say for anybody interested, I just heard something about Wilhelm Reich that he treated cancer successfully. So, and he would tell people, he said he would treat it because that's different. But yeah, that's interesting. I got to look into Kevin Trudeau. Funny last name too. I wonder
Mm.
connected to Justin.
You what really got me is you talked about earlier the giant's foot and the bend in the lake, and then the story of the Thunderbirds versus the giants, right?
Mhm.
And it reminded me of like I don't know if I know that it's a Jewish traditional belief they believe about in the Bible, but with the fallen, I think it's called like the 200 or something. And basically, it was the fallen, they came and they bred with humans and animals. And they say that that's where like these hybrids that these different cultures have. Like there's the one, I think it's in like Peru or Ecuador, where they talk about uh, the giants bred with, or like a giant bird came and bred with man, and that created a civilization there. And so it's really wild when you think about like the Nephilim were giants. And so Thunderbirds could be a separate hybrid of such. And it reminds me of like in Greek mythology, like because in the Bible, I know when God found out about the Nephilim and about them breeding with humans, he was like, your punishment's going to be you need to watch your children die that you created. And so basically that was like the flood was the first time they tried to wipe all that civilization out, but some survived. And so you continue through the whole Old Testament, and all of those battles are in essence of trying to cleanse earth of that whole genealogy of half angel, half man hybrid type thing. What's wild to me is a lot of the stuff that like I look into and stuff, you find like when they start getting into these really wild spiritual practices that they become militarized. And they start using the different military bases to do these things. So it really, like, when I think of cryptids, it's like, I don't know if it's manufactured or whatever, but it's wild to see these stories because, like I said, you see in the Bible where it talks about the massacre of their children and they're forced to watch because they create them and knew they weren't supposed to. That's the same as the Titans and the gods on Mount Olympus fighting, you know? And basically, they massacred their own children. Another one, you got a shit ton of books back there. And I would love to see what you got. But dude, if you haven't, read this one.
Oh, yeah, Chris Bledsoe.
Dude, so good. Another good one, too, if I could suggest another one. Are you familiar with Rick Rubin, the producer?
Yeah.
This one, if you're into like creativity, it's called The Creative Act. It goes through like breaking like any creative block whatsoever. Different way. It's really awesome. I mean, the guy wasn't a musician, but he's like one of the greatest producers I feel of all time.
Yeah. Yeah, I saw that he was on Rogan, and I don't know that I think I listened to some of it, but yeah, I'll check that out. I have
Yeah.
had a writer's block recently, so I might need to look at that.
Yeah, he talks like one of the big ones too is they talk about like in System of a Down when they did Toxicity, he recorded that album and they were doing the Chop Suey song and they couldn't figure out how to end it. So he's like, all right, everybody, we need to go for a walk. We're going to go for a walk. We're going to come back and I want you to pick a book on the wall. And he just reached and grabbed a book and it was the Bible. And then he's like, okay, open it to a random page and put your finger on it. And we're going to see what it is. And he opened it and it was, why have you forsaken me in your thoughts, in your heart, forsaken me, you know? And so they ended the song with that just because in that process of freeing your mind from the creative aspect and coming back to it, it was like, take a step in the direction and the universe will meet you tenfold, you know? And then boom, it's wild. And that's the whole book is like all kinds of different things that are in there. Like he's like, there's just different vibrations and frequencies and many different ways to get to them.
Yeah, I love that. I think that would be right up my alley, and I think that's how a lot of this came to me, just by living my life and sort of soaking it in and being in a place where, New Haven, obviously, if you're paying attention, these things are going to jump out at you. Every place has its own story to tell. That's why I started another podcast I do called Esoteric America, which we haven't made any episodes recently, but we're still going to do it. So don't think about stealing the name, anybody.
Oh, no, I've actually been, I've
Not you
first
guys,
reached
but
out. Yeah, I reached out to you to get on there.
I know, and
Yeah,
I
still working on it.
here's the problem with having a show where there's three other hosts, which I'm
Yeah.
sure you guys know this, is you always have to be able to get everybody on the same page. So, but if you want, I have wanted to do more episodes of Esoteric America, and since Chad and Roman are busy, maybe you could join Tara and I as a guest, and we can talk about whatever
Love it. I'm in Mojave County. I'm in Lake Havasu. I
Yeah,
don't know if you know anything about Lake Havasu.
I've heard about it, and you've told me a little bit in your message, so I'm sure there's plenty to look into. Like I said, every place has its, story to tell, and I think you just have to kind of open your mind to receiving that information, and it's going to appear to you like in the form of a Native American homeless dude. Like, he's not homeless anymore. I will say that because, there's a certain stigma around homeless people. And I mean, my parents, they were like freaked out when they found out I had befriended a homeless person. They were so worried about me. And I'm like, calm down. Like, I'm fine. I'm an adult now. I can figure out who my friends are, But this guy, he's such a cool dude. I still keep in touch with them, and like I said, no longer homeless, but he kind of synchronistically was like a mentor. I mean, he taught me about Geronimo and Skull and Bones, sure, but taught me about a bunch more than that, and it definitely set me on a certain course in life that led me to where I'm at now. And it's funny because I was in community college when I met Amos, but I dropped out and I ended up hanging out at a different college. My friends were all part of this basically fraternity that had been kicked off of campus. So they were their own secret society essentially, and only students were allowed. And since I had gone to a community college, they're like, all right, yeah, you count. So they let me pledge. And it was weird because I had learned about Skull and Bones from Amos, and then when I joined this fraternity, and I won't say the names of any places, not to give away, because I shouldn't be telling you this part, but in one of our initiation ceremonies, they took us to Skull and Bones. They didn't take us inside or anything because they weren't connected like that, but they stood us in front of the building to like freak us out. We wore blindfolds and we got out and looked at this building, and they told us a little bit about it and how it's this old secret society, and we're a part of something that's connected to that. And I doubt that there's really any connections, because I know who founded the frat that I was in. We were like 16 years old at that point that I had joined, so there was a little bit of a track record. Everybody who founded it was still alive and has social media, so I know they're not like a Rockefeller or something like that. But it was very weird that, like, okay, here's life throwing me this curveball again. And then a friend who I'd made in the fraternity, he became a really good friend of mine afterwards. He got me a job at a bakery selling German bread, of all European countries, of course, German.
Kaiser rolls or something.
Well, no, surprisingly, but German breads, like fancy German stuff for Yale
Oh,
University, because there's a German culture at Yale. I wonder why. Skull and Bones
Mm,
might have something to do with that, with their
mm,
German connections and the fact that they pretty much bought the school at some point. So it was just weird. Like, okay, I know about this group. Now I have a job where I'm like in Yale delivering stuff in Yale. I'd go into certain buildings and just see things that the average person wouldn't be privy to walking around in public. So yeah, I definitely, none of that was lost on me. So yeah, if that's happening for you where you live, I encourage anybody, yourselves and anyone listening, to follow your instincts and, learn about where you're from, because it is important. It's a story that's connected to your life, and stories have momentum. Like, once you get a story going, the universe wants to add more chapters. Like, if you are in a rut in your life and you're feeling like you're at a low point, like, this is a secret that you can use to change your life for the better. You have to just, as you pointed out with the Rick Rubin anecdote, you have to kind of unplug and let some kind of like this feedback loop that you're in kind of turn off, and just let nature kind of take over for even 30 minutes.
mm.
Give yourself a reset in nature and think about what your real goals are, and then take a step towards one of those goals and start to think in terms of, I'm on my way to that. Like, this is something I have. It's just not, like when you read a book, like when you start out at the beginning, the end is already there. It's already at the end of the book. The point is not to start from the back and then read the first page, right? You don't start with the last page, but it's there. The ending's fixed, and our lives are kind of like that in a way. Like, once the story's done, it's fixed. That's your life. And if you think about your life in those terms, you can rewrite the story. You don't have to live the story you're in now, essentially. And that might not be the case for people who enjoy the story they're living, but that's my advice to people who, yeah, might be feeling down, because I was in that spot and still am occasionally, takes reminders every now and then. But yeah, I think that's a big part of it. And like Skull and Bones, to connect back to them, their whole goal is to initiate a person into this group and give them this story that's kind of fabricated. They're not really living a true life. They're not living by their own accord once they join a group like this. First of all, as you said, they put themselves in a coffin for 24 hours. But I've also heard that they are in that coffin naked, and they're made to confess their darkest secrets, which I don't know how you can have that many dark secrets at 19 to 22, but who knows?
So at
Maybe.
this point, let me just make something up.
Yeah, like, I mean, how many weird stories? I mean, unless they're really going for really, screwed up dudes, which I would be surprised if people with that much money and their parents aren't very involved.
History.
They're raised by their nannies, right? Like those
Mhm.
types of people, who knows? Maybe there are some cracks in the natural wiring, and those are the people that become more sociopathic, right? Like that's the whole statistic with CEOs, is there's like a greater degree of sociopaths within that job category, because it takes such high stakes and high risk reward ratio that only a certain type of person can even make it. But I wonder if that's not like something that they've created over time. Maybe it wasn't like that 200 years ago, but yeah, I think that's kind of what goes on, is these guys, they elect themselves to live a life separate from the rest of us. And yeah, they're rewarded for it. But I also think that, like, these people who are insulated by lots of money, they start to really resent other humans. And it's a projection, because they don't feel connected and they want to. So they're not blaming the right reasons. They're blaming the people they see as lesser thans. And this is something that's happened throughout history. It's not, you know, something that only the American elite have done. It's not something that only white elite have done. I mean, this happens in Asia, this happens in South America, it happens everywhere, right? But I think when we understand these political, sociological dynamics better, we're able to fend off these subversive attacks, like the scientism movement. I'm not completely Bible thumping Christian type. I'm not really even someone who goes to church, but I believe in God, and I think those ideas are kind of more life affirming than what science offers us right now. So, if that's going to help people live a happier and better life, I'm all for people believing in God. But it seems like the government, they want people believing in the government. They don't want people believing in God, because people who believe in something higher than the government can't be controlled. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's the spaghetti monster or it's Christ on a cross. Like they don't want anybody believing in anything bigger than the state. And these sorts of ideas were being thought about in Germany right when Skull and Bones was allegedly formed, right? So
Mhm.
it's like weird that, okay, they have all these ideas, they insert themselves into America, and then they spread those ideas throughout the college system. And now we have Marxists, people who identify as Marxists, who are in college. They hate America, even though they're so privileged, right? They think we need to burn down the patriarchy and crush this corrupt government. Meanwhile, Biden and all the rest that they love are some of the most corrupt politicians America's ever seen,
Mhm.
right? So it's all misdirection and screwed up and sorcery, quite frankly. And I'm trying to make heads or tails of it and get to the bottom of it. And I've
So
started
I have a question
Yale
for
and
you.
Harvard are it.
I have a question for you. So, or I guess for both of you guys, if they did like release all the information these secret societies have and they keep secret and they
On all of
open
them,
these like
everyone.
like the books and like the rituals and the things that are going to make you more powerful, if they release it to everybody, do you think that would be a good idea or a bad idea?
I think it's
Or
already there. We just don't know which ones to look at.
no, it's not even like it's not even at that point. Like the point of the secrecy is so that people don't catch on to what's happening right now. All that stuff you just described is all well and good, but it's in every bookstore. You can go to Barnes and Noble and learn about how to do black magic. You might not be effective at it because you don't have the resources to pull off a human sacrifice without getting arrested or whatever, but I'm sure that kind of thing goes on, and like Maria Abramovich and all those creeps with their art,
Yeah.
the art world is where they have been connected from the beginning. I mean, art and esotericism are connected, and Skull and Bones is right next to the art museum at Yale. Like it's literally owned. The owner of the property of the art museum had to buy it from Skull and Bones. So yeah, there's deep connections with the art world and secret societies, and it's all out there. They do it in plain sight because, as Frank said, like they think we're so like simple minded and busy with life that we won't figure it out and we won't catch on, and even if we do, we don't have enough money and resources at this point to get ahead of them. And yeah, they might have gotten us there, and they did that over the past 150 years with the banks and the oil industry and all these industries that they're creating now with tech and whatnot. But I think it's not a game they can win because their biggest commodity is human beings. And it's like it's so weird. It's kind of like, they're dependent on us, like a parasite can't completely kill its host, although some do. But when a parasite kills its host, it has to move on to another host, right? And I don't think the elites can afford to kill everyone on the earth because then they'll have nobody to do their bidding, right? So
They'll have to do all the work themselves.
yeah, and that's like the whole AI Skynet bullshit thing. And I talked to a guy yesterday who's from MIT, wrote a book about simulation and all that. He says, "Oh, we're only in, general brain capabilities for AI. Right now AI is only at the point where it can like basically mimic speech, but it's not even really at the point of totally understanding, how to have a conversation, right? I mean, we're kind of on that edge, but he was saying like it's going to take a long time before we get to like super intelligence.
See, I don't see that because I feel it's like the more we use it and the more it learns from us, the faster it becomes prevalent. You know what I mean?
He could just be trying to like, you know,
I'm not
oh, I
like
know.
shooting
I,
it
I
down.
agree with you. I agree with you. I mean, hey, the guy's from MIT. I'm never going to talk bad about a guess. He's a nice guy, but yeah, he could just be like, somebody who's drank the Kool-Aid and doesn't see it, right?
Or even then, like every Freemason's not a bad person. Like the people at the lower levels don't know. They're just trying to be a part of a fraternity or some sort. You know what I mean? Those at the top are the ones that know what's going on, and they're never going to release that information to them because those people leave and they won't get their money from those people joining.
Right.
I got a good one. You're into like Native American history and stuff. So back to Lake Havasu, we have one of our biggest landmarks in Lake Havasu is the London Bridge, and it's the actual London Bridge from England. They packed it up and shipped it here, and we gave them this area. We said, "Oh, we'll pay you rent for the bridge," and basically, it's like the big visitor center. Well, when you looked on Wikipedia, it's only on certain ones. So I gotta screenshot which one. Like if I do London Bridge, it won't come up. I have to look in my notes as to which one I did, but it basically goes as far as to say that Great Britain said you no longer have to pay tax as long as you give us this Native American statue. And I'm like, bro, we were paying lots of money for that bridge and for that area just because our city is like a tourism place. And so we're paying Great Britain a bunch of money just to rent out that bridge. And they said, oh, you don't have to pay us anything anymore. Just give us that Indian statue. like a weird like dancing Indian. And so the two main tribes here are the Havasupai and the Wallapai. Those were the originals over here in the Havasu Basin, which the lake I'm at is a man-made lake, but it's part of the Colorado River, which has been a part of the Mojave Desert for quite some time. And so it's all river people. Like, dude, there's lots. We didn't have a freaking road in this town till 1974. It was dirt roads and there were no police. So it was used as a trafficking location for the mafia from Vegas to South, all that. But I thought you would enjoy that little Native American statue, London
What
Bridge.
type of statue? Wooden statue or a stone statue?
Yeah, so it showed a picture of it. It was red and black and it had like the feather hat and it literally looked like, I don't want to say the wrong tribe, but it looked like one of those old Hopi dancing Indian statues, but it was a little wood one. It's not like some big ass statue.
Oh,
It's
wow.
like a figurine that they traded this bridge and their rent for.
Oh,
And so it didn't go into it. So that's why I was like, look, I got a lot that I got to try and get through because I want to be as accurate as possible. And it's just wild. And then like I'm right here by Route 66 too. So you start looking into asphalt and Freemasonry and how they were involved in paving everything. Then you blend in like mafia and all the cement and asphalt that they ran across the United States. And this is one of them. They went from New York to Vegas and came here and paved this whole city in 1974. And
yeah.
there's still stash houses like by the golf course and by the high school that were built way in the 50s, and they literally have like a complete separate stash house where for drugs or people or whatever they were trafficking at the time.
Huh. Yeah, wow, that's all very interesting. That reminds me, the part about the asphalt stuff reminds me of James Shelby Downard. Maybe you're
Yeah,
familiar.
yeah.
Okay.
He was
Yeah.
Florida, right?
Yeah.
Florida and traveled to California. Like he wrote a bunch of books, right?
Well, I think he only wrote the one, but other
Or a
people have
bunch of
written
documents or
about
something.
him. Yeah,
Yeah,
he wrote stuff for sure, but a bunch of people have written about him. That's true.
yeah. It's crazy too because then you can tie him into like a lot of the weird stuff happening like the Appalachian area, and then you tie it into California. You even it broke down to like Parsons was a part of the people he was chasing that took his wife or his girlfriend, right?
Mhm.
Something like that.
Mhm.
Yeah, wild.
Yeah, there's a whole lot of stuff. I've never been that far west, but
Well, if you ever do, you got a place, my good man. I'm right here. I'm 3 hours from Phoenix, 3 hours from Vegas. I'm right here.
oh, well, that's awesome. We definitely have to do an Esoteric America about that specific spot. I'd love to have Chad on, maybe not Roman because he's very busy, but maybe we can squeeze a time in with Chad. He's been busy, but yeah, definitely we have to have you on for that because Esoteric America's coming back. Don't worry, and
Worried at all, man. You always bring
yeah,
the heat.
and we're gonna need guests. So yeah, definitely.
So I have a question. What is in studying all of this, because you've spent so much time, you've been on the campus, you didn't like your own tours as a delivery and stuff like that. What is the biggest anomaly to you after doing all these studies with this whole situation with the group? What is it still that is like your biggest question?
Well, as I say this, I'm thinking I should go and visit the other Ivy League schools because I wonder if other colleges have the same amount of secret society buildings because that stood out the most is when you drive around New Haven, there are these giant buildings that look like they're out of Greece or Egypt, or even like the cemetery gate is Egyptian in style. And next to them will be like a huge skyscraper or a very ornate Romanesque college building. And so, yeah, the architecture stood out the most to me. And I think what's going on underneath it all is even more interesting. I'm kind of still astounded that I only just noticed this recently because Chad, who I just mentioned, he has done a bunch of research into Detroit, where he's from, and I'm really grateful to
Red
have.
Wings there. Sorry.
Oh yeah, right on. I'm grateful to have him as a member of the Esoteric America show because he was a big inspiration for all this. And one of the things that really stood out to him that got him researching all of this stuff is an artist named Osama Noguchi who created what Chad describes as a Stargate portal in Detroit. Right? You might have heard of this. Sam Tripoli's had Chad on talking about it. The Higher Side Chats has interviewed him talking about it. I've interviewed him talking about it. So people might be familiar with these Stargate portals and this artist, Osamu Noguchi. Maybe you don't know his name, but I was kind of blown away when I found out that Osamu Noguchi also built something in New Haven. And
Wow.
it's not shocking that he, this would go unnoticed because he built this underground. You can only see it if you look over this like wall. So they have like a wall and you can kind of like peek over it and see it, and it's an underground sculpture garden, and it has a pyramid. It has a big like disc with a circle in it, basically like the number 0 basically looks like, and then they have a cube on one of the corners, like if you threw a dice and it kind of rolled, it kind of looks like that, right? So it's kind of on a point, it's standing up, and so all this is made out of this nice, beautiful white marble, and there's this like pattern underneath it all that kind of looks like you know, when you'd see like an animation of like a 3D globe and they have like all the lines of like the longitude and latitude. It kind of looks like that, right? There's all these like connecting lines in a circular sort of motion. So it's weird because it's underground and, it's a sculpture. Like, don't you want people to see it, right? But it's underground, and I think that's kind of hinting at how much other stuff is underground that the
Mhm.
public doesn't get access to, tunnels and all this stuff that might be under New Haven, even the graves that are just below the surface. And then right next to that is the Beinecke Memorial Rare Book and Manuscript Library, and they have the Voynich manuscript, which is like an translated, they haven't figured out what language it's written in book. It's like this mysterious book that nobody knows who wrote, and some people think it comes from the fairy realm, some people think it comes from another planet, some people think it's like a secret code that only Shakespeare wrote. Like there's all these weird theories about the Voynich manuscript. They have the only copy. They also have the world's oldest copy of the Bible. They have a copy of the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which wasn't a book.
Repeat that. Voynich what? I'm sorry. I'm writing it down.
Yeah, Voynich. So it's spelled Voynich manuscript.
And
And then yeah, the Egyptian Book of the Dead, which isn't a book you'd have on your shelf because it was a book that Egyptian people would bury with them when they died. So it's like a book that you read in your afterlife to guide you through the afterlife. They have a copy of that.
you're
So
just like Beetlejuice. They got the book on the coffee table and they got to draw the doorway on their wall to go and learn how to be dead, right?
I mean, I haven't seen that movie, but I know the
Oh
reference.
my, Mark.
Oh, please go watch. It is probably Michael Keaton's best performance.
Yeah, okay. I
Yeah.
know the character. I've heard about it, but
Oh,
yeah.
it's funny.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
So we were talking about what really like ding when you were talking about New Haven and the nine panel square pretty much to create the cube. In Revelation 21, John, the Apostle John, talks about New Jerusalem uh, and it being the heavenly city, and he says that it's shaped like a perfect cube. And when the cube is unrolled, it becomes a cross.
Mm, wow. See, now this is why I need to be closer up on my Bible study because I just typed in Revelation 21 and it says a new heaven and a new earth, which is basically, yeah,
Right?
New Haven. So, wow, yeah, that's awesome. I gotta look into that. But there's all these connections with the biblical, like not exactly what your average, Christian might take away from the Bible, but this like secret part sort of message about the end of the world, it seems like they're that's the theme. That's what they're most interested in. But that's awesome. Yeah. I think the 9 squares, it obviously is not a cross, but you could probably find a cross if you looked at the geometry of like New Haven. I got to do that. I'm going to go look because there's Church Street, which maybe Church Street is like one of the main lines of the cross.
I
And then
think
there's
the way it
Chapel
describes the
Street.
cross is like if you had the cube. I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt
All
you,
right.
but like think of a cube sitting on its side, and if you unrolled it and
Would
you have
turn into a cross.
a flat, and then the
Oh,
two,
yeah. I get it. Yeah. Oh,
and it literally like visualizes that in that scripture. And I believe the same with you. What really ties me to it is it's like all of these different civilizations and all of these different secret societies use it to a certain extent. And it's like, I was raised Christian my entire life, and I recently, within 2 years, have like it didn't resonate with me. I just did it because it was habitual. And but I really wanted to understand it more myself and why. Like, why am I being spoon-fed this? Why am I even, what is so compelling about it? And I'll be honest, in the last 2 years, I've never felt closer to God or universe or source or whatever you want to say. It just makes it so evident. Like a lot of the things I was preached to as a kid are like, you know, every person on earth will, Christ will reveal themselves to you. Well, there's civilizations that have never met in educated civilization, and they have very similar documents portraying the same things that those that are civilized places, like they have the firmament and different pictures of ancient things that are completely the same. And then you got like different texts like the Epic of Gilgamesh, and how certain portions of those stories are the same thing, different names, different. It's like when you go to church, you have a pastor that gets up there. If he's a speaker that's a visiting speaker, all he's doing is relating to you, and he's telling you things in his own perspective based on what he studied. So how is that any different than any of these texts that correlate with themselves when you look at it with an open mind? I've realized in those last 2 years, rather, it's almost like it forces you to be polarized. And polarized is closed-minded to me. And for me, it's like, how can I be closed-minded and wish to understand it? I can't. So I try to approach everything with as like devil's advocate. Like, for instance, let's just give an example. Like, I don't agree with anything that Bill Gates is doing or the way he goes about doing these things, but then I try to empathize at a sense like, okay, he was a kid and both his parents were eugenicists, and he was surrounded by rich people that wanted to control population in the world. So all he knows as love is what he was shown by those that loved him. So not saying what he's doing is right, but who am I to say that he thinks he's doing the right thing, but he's not? You know what I mean? And how is that any different than anybody? I look at it too. It's like you can be in a room full of LEDs and you're never going to see me light a match, but you can walk into a room of darkness and light one match and it'll light that entire room up, and you can light other things to continue the burn, right? So for me, it's like if Mao Zedong or whatever his name was didn't go to Tibet and start massacring freaking all these Buddhists, the Dalai Lama would have never left and the Western world would have never known what Buddhism is. And that's just an example of like different things. It's kind of, and that's where we're getting into the black and white stone, the duality. Like one can't exist without the other, but not only can they not exist, but it's not evident. You know what I mean? Everything becomes a blur. And I don't know, man. It's very it's in everything. You see it in everything. hidden in plain sight. And I feel like when we get to that level, it's like the things you've read multiple times, certain parts of it jump out at you and you can perceive it at a different level that others couldn't. And I feel that when you get that, it's up to you to deliver that message that you read, whether, you know what I mean? Obviously, I'm not one for like, if I'm not going to go and say these things to a normie, but if somebody is asking and is, you know, willing, I don't know, but this is what I found. And it does this when I read it, you know?
Mhm.
Plus, we only perceive 3% of the light spectrum. What does the other 97% consist of? And it could exist here as we do. We just don't perceive it. You know what I mean?
Right on. Yeah. Yeah. I think that's all great points.
I don't know. I don't know if it correlates. It's just one of those things. It really sticks with me. And just need to ask more questions. There's nothing wrong with asking questions.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that's what we're here on the podcast doing, right?
Exactly. Okay, I got a question for you. What book are you reading right now? Like that, I know you're probably reading multiple, but which one has you enthralled?
Well, I don't live here where the podcast is recorded now, unfortunately. So the books I'm reading aren't here. They're at home near my bed, but I'm reading a book called The Sharter by by a guy that reached out to me on Telegram. He's a fan of the show. He's a cool dude. His name's Al Dog, and it's a play on the album The Carter by Jay-Z. And he's basically just breaking down why hip hop has become like a negative force in culture when it
Mm.
initially set out to be a positive one. So that's interesting. That's kind of more of a podcast related book, like a book I'm reading for the podcast. And I only got it because he reached out and said he sent it to me, which I always appreciate that. I love that. But I guess my favorite book, I mean, I've been reading on a weird tangent, not weird, but just different. I've been reading comic books. I don't think you need to hear about that. Uh, the Fall of X has really got me. But anyways, yeah, I guess the latest book I read before I started reading The Charter is a book called A Story Waiting to Pierce You, and it's a really cool book by Peter Kingsley. You mentioned The Alchemist before by Paul Coelho.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of like that. It's like a novel with nonfiction wrapped into it and a real lesson. Um, and it's kind of like a true story too, allegedly. So it's really interesting. And it talks about Tibet. It's like kind of related to what you mentioned about Buddhism in a way, but more of the like Mongolian shamanism and Buddhism and stuff. So yeah, it's a weird book. It's cool. I don't think I'll be able to interview the author, but my friend Mike Wan recommended I read it. So when I finish it, I will be interviewing with him about it, hopefully, talking about it a little bit.
That's awesome. It kind of sounds like, in an essence, by your description, kind of like Genuflect by Tracy Twyman, where it's like real things, but written in a fictional way.
Mm.
Kind of like Dan Brown, but not, you know?
Mm. Yeah, I have that book, but yeah,
Oh, dang. I don't have a like physical copy, but I have it on PDF, and that book is phenomenal.
yeah, I heard that book's rare now. Mike gave it to me, the guy I just mentioned.
The last time I tried to buy it, a physical copy on Amazon, it was $666.
Yeah, I think they did that on purpose because they didn't want
Mm.
anybody buying the book. Yeah.
I've noticed that with a lot of different books. What was the one during COVID that everyone was bringing up? That one book where it was talking about basically everything that was going on, and you go to buy the book on Amazon. It was like a 3-book series. I don't remember who wrote the book. But basically, dude, what was it? What was it? It was like a horror author. I can't remember. But they had the 3 books and they went freaking ridiculous prices. We're talking like multiple hundreds of dollars for a paperback. I've noticed that with lots of things, like you said, when they don't want you to have it.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that was a sort of a special case because the author died and the family didn't want people reading the book or any of
Oh,
the
really?
books. Yeah. But yeah, that's a sad story that I prefer not to get into. But yeah, it's definitely, something that happens on Amazon for sure with Amazon where they, censor, suppress
Mhm.
books. Yeah, I mean, that's what I think it was designed to do, is to put all the books in one place on the internet so they'd be able to control it. They can't. I don't think they could ever do that. People sell books directly now, right? You can, I mean, even you can get like a publisher for
Man,
like
I'm in
40
Arizona.
bucks.
I could go meet at Denny's and buy a pistol from somebody and write a bill of sale on a napkin and walk out. You know what I mean? Like, so yeah, books. Yeah, I'm sure.
Yeah, pen or the sword.
Yeah, right. That reminds me of the old Saturday Night Live freaking oh what he's like Sean Conn, the penis mightier. That's the pen is mightier. Um yeah, dude. I just want to thank you on the real because it's one of those things where like you said, when you would be doing your Amazon stuff and you'd be doing I'm doing exactly what you did to begin your research to do your podcast. And I just want to thank you for the influence and inspiration, to be
Yeah,
honest.
I love it. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure you've heard me talk about it. There's podcasts I listen to that inspired me to start my show. So it's a huge compliment to hear that people are feeling that way and starting a show because of my show. I mean, thank you. Yeah, I'm glad. I wish you the best. And, I mean, like I said, like, obviously my story is specific to New Haven and all that. And there's some weird stuff going on here, but obviously every place has weird stuff going on. So I don't feel like, some sort of special case over here. Like, I think everybody has the potential to do what I've done. It just takes like opening yourself up to that info. It's just like, I think it's the synchronicity is what's important, like
Mhm.
just, it really, when you notice it, you're on the right track. I think that might sound strange to people who aren't familiar with it, synchronicity, but once it starts happening, it's like that momentum, like I was saying before with your story. And obviously you don't want to be a delivery driver your whole life. So, I mean, hey, if that's your story, fucking create the business that you want to do. I mean, if that's podcasting and whatever it is, that's
I
what
don't deliver. I am actually a screen printer, so I make like all kinds of sick shirts and stuff all day. But I literally just 4 hours at a time till the headphones die and I charge them for lunch, you know what I mean? And recharge. But I literally, like I said, you have like the perfect length of time to gain just so much knowledge, which, okay, so I asked you and you told me your favorite color was green. Sorry, dude, I got but I looked it up and I've been waiting this whole time. So green represents nature, growth, rebirth, health, hope, and many positive things related to overall well-being. One can sense the feeling of belonging and tranquility whenever one sees this soothing color, and it perfectly resonates the nature cycle of birth, death, and the rebirth with transformation and new beginnings.
beautiful. Yeah, I think that's why I
You
like
said that
color.
resonated before, yeah, so you already knew, yeah.
Well, yeah, I think that's just like the most human color, I don't know.
Are you
Everything.
an earth sign?
No, air sign,
Oh.
Libra. But yeah, I think, no matter what color you are, we could all relate to the color green.
At what? Yeah, yeah. That's crazy too, because then you just think of, wow, dude, it's like the light spectrum, but it's percent like you're the freaking, you're the Pink Floyd pyramid, dif- diffract or diffusing the white light coming in,
Mm.
and based on the spectrum, it's almost like, dude, if we're all energy, energies are photons, right? So to me, that symbology is hitting and showing how even though we're all different, I go backwards. We're all different, but we are the same.
Mm.
I
Yeah,
know.
I
Yeah.
love it. Yeah. I mean, people who like blue or red or whatever don't feel alienated. Those are all relatable too. Fire, water,
Oh, my
nature.
favorite's orange. And like, this is why we started it. I was just like,
Mm.
Marisol, my favorite color has always been orange. And I had this idea and I looked it up. I'm going to read it to you. You tell me. And she's just like, dude, that's freaking you. Like, that's wild. And so that's why I just started asking every guest. Like,
Yeah.
I was the guinea pig,
Okay. Well, that's the best way to figure something out is to try it on yourself.
right? Some things. But but I also wanted to talk to you about Maui being, I mean, I listened to your podcast. Um, dude, you did like three. Your last three were with guests all talking with it. Right? It was Greg Carlwood, and then you had the one with Seb and uh Romeo was on there, and or Rome, and Lunos, was that the other guy?
Yeah, Loomis. Yeah. Yeah,
And then
two
you had the
episodes.
other guy talking about the Costa Rican soil too, but he was talking about
Mm,
direct energy weapons and stuff too. So I just like, and I don't want to focus on direct energy weapons. Um, what I wanted to see, what do you feel on the correlation between that situation and what happened mainland in Ohio with the train wreck, and spilling all the things? It's almost like they did the same thing to take over this town, but for whatever other reasons. It just, and then you look at Paradise Fires, California, like it, to me, it just looks blatant in a way, in many different things are not adding up. And I don't believe in coincidence. I believe in synchronicity, like you said.
yeah. Yeah, it's funny. I'm not like usually topical podcast, but when something comes up, it's not bad to do a show that is topical. It definitely gets maybe more attention than a regular episode would. But I didn't set out to talk about that. It's funny. Greg was on Tinfoil Hat talking about it, but he was also on my show talking about another thing. And then Topher brought it up because we were talking about forest fires, and yeah, it definitely is something that I think needs to be talked about. But I would refer people to my episode with Seb, Loomis, and Roman, because once I talked to Topher about it, I was like, well, I have nothing I can add myself. It's not really, I've never been there. All I can say is just repeat what other people have said. So I interviewed Seb, Loomis, and Roman because they live in Hawaii. So I'm like, okay, let me ask the guys who are in Hawaii that I know what's going on. And from what I gathered from them, yeah, it seems like what the media is telling us is all a lie, but when is that ever new?
Yeah.
And with the indigenous people, like I said earlier, their houses got decimated, and I don't think that's an accident. They in Hawaii, the people there, they're strong. They have heritage and roots and togetherness and community, and it they fight to maintain that, and they have integrity about that. And I think the billionaires who want to profit off of vacation destinations like Hawaii, they don't care. They have no sympathy for people, no matter what race, creed, or color they are. And they especially have no sympathy for the indigenous people when their whole mindset, their whole worldview as wealthy elite capitalists, communists, even, um, their whole mindset is predicated on, you know, taking what they want no matter what the cost is. That's the mindset. It goes against the
I
indigenous.
feel like it's been coming for a while too, because they suppress the people from Hawaii, like for everything. They're so dependent on the government, and they have been for a while, like most of the people there are on some sort of government assistance. They're, on EBT. They don't have job opportunities like we do. So it's been something that's been building up for a while. It's not only in Maui, it's all the other islands. They're all kind of stuck in that same dependency on the government. So like what you're saying is it aligns with it so much. Like they suppress them so much, and they know that they're powerful, but they keep them under control of the government. And it's super sad. But yeah, like just exactly what you're saying. Like it's just something that's been coming for a while.
Yeah. Yeah. To reiterate your point, it's definitely a sad situation like any other, indigenous group. They're facing a lot of challenges, and colonization is still an active force. And I mean, it kind of started in, here in America, at least on the East Coast, and has continued all the way west to Hawaii and around the globe. So that's another reason why I think studying like Skull and Bones is important, because they're connected to all this through Yale, through all the people that have graduated, that have gone on to, profit off of war and all this, you know, taking the land from people of all different tribes, not just the Hawaiian tribes, the, people where you're from in California, where you're from, Frank, in Arizona, all the way back to the first wave, where I'm from, 400 years ago. Those people were pretty much disappeared or made to move out of their land, so yeah, it's a continuation of the same force, unfortunately.
Just a mower, just take it all. Unreal. Oh, so take Hawaii, right? So I think a lot of the reason like they use these islands and stuff like test grounds, like Australia, for instance, they've been a test ground, obviously, for many different things we've seen in flux. And then you see Canada as a test ground, and they say, well, the next step is USA. And then you see Hawaii being an island of the United States. And it takes me back, like the only place I could think of out of the top, like off the top of my head, where they could start to do the same thing inland would be Utah, like we were talking about. And the only reason is based on the intelligence community there and how tight-lipped everybody is, because they're already raised in Mormonism and keeping the secrets of their religion and their lifestyle. And if you're a Mormon, it's more about, like, some of those people get into Mormonism not for the religion, but for the connections of being successful, and some of those guys, dude, how the hell could anybody have 4 wives? I've had one, dude, and that's hard as hell, just one, you know what I mean?
Yeah. Well, and Freemasonry was like a big influence on Mormonism right from the beginning. So, yeah, they're definitely connected to secret societies. That's why it wouldn't surprise me that the Skull and Bones at the University of Utah is legit, because maybe they need a special wing of Skull and Bones just for Mormons.
And it also makes you think too, like of nonlinear warfare. Like, I'm going to give you something true, but I'm also going to give you something false, and I'm not going to tell you anything else. If you want to research it, you research it, but you could get lost down the rabbit hole, and the whole part is just disassociation from what was really true in the get-go.
Yeah. Yeah, it's all sorcery, as Sam's been saying lately.
Yeah. You know, I've noticed that with everything though. If you like, I realized recently, like I've been studying a lot of etymology, and you look at like the word grimoire. Grimoire is a book of spells, but the etymology of it, the word became grammar. And English language is spell, you know, and spelling. And so spelling, grammar, and the derivative of grammar is grimoire. So it all just makes sense, you know? But you say that to somebody and you look like you have a green face.
Well, and I wouldn't recommend people make that their, opening
Oh,
line in conversation. Like that's a red flag, even if you're interested in this stuff, like. But I do think that that's like a symptom, and it's partly why my family thinks I'm crazy, because I'm guilty of it too. Like when I created this show, that phrase hit me because I told them that I was quitting my job to go work for a guy that lived on the other side of the country, but I wasn't moving to the other side of the country. I'm like, it's like an internet job. And I tell him, oh, it's Sam Tripoli. He's, this big, awesome podcaster,
shout
comedian.
out Sam Tripoli.
Shout out. And they don't know who that is. They're only references with comedy or what they see on TV. So they don't know who Sam is. So they kind of were like, what do you mean? So that was like when I was like, oh, my family thinks I'm crazy, but that wasn't like a new thing at that time. That was 10 years into them thinking I was crazy, and they love me, don't get me wrong, and they're definitely not like, Nazis or anything, like telling me not to think what I'm thinking. But when I bring up any sort of contrary opinion, or maybe try to red pill them on something that's going on, their first instinct is always to question what I'm saying and maybe put more trust into an official narrative.
Mhm,
And I
mhm.
always try to question that. And I think, it was much harder 10 years ago. They would shut it down immediately. But
Well,
now,
they're not telling me that on
Well,
the news.
now
Not
you
they
on
know
the
what's crazy is like even going back to Maui, like the first thing that I noticed was after the fires, even the people from Maui, because I have a lot of friends out in Hawaii, like everybody started questioning things immediately. Like it's like people's intuitions are turning on.
and
Because
I think we can't get fooled so many times, because with the whole, I don't know if you guys are posting this to YouTube, so I'll just say with the pan, what, that was, you know, that was a whole thing that everybody went through, and clearly there was a whole bunch of Chicken Little running around telling everyone the sky was falling. Meanwhile, the sky's still there, and
Mhm.
we're all here 4 years later like, hey, the sky's still there.
And we just had that here in California again too, because they were like, we're gonna have the biggest hurricane California's ever experienced, and we're all sitting here like laughing, like, no, nobody prepped. We're all just like hanging out at home, like, and Sunday fun day, we're gonna have another good day. And sure enough, no hurricane ever came by. We just had a little bit of rain, but same, it's like everybody's just like, nah, stop. Like, we're not going to listen to the news anymore. Like, whatever happens now, if something does happen, people are already going to automatically question, be like, oh, it was the government. It's like a new something turned on for everybody after,
Yeah,
what we
and
just went through.
I think it goes down political lines. Like people maybe in blue states who are more conservative are definitely more, awake to this stuff now. Maybe people in conservative states who are blue like woke up 10 years ago, you know what I mean? So like this kind of thing happens in waves. I remember when I was like young, the Iraq war was going on, and like George Bush and the conservatives were the enemy. And like if you were into conspiracies back then you would like learn about, the war machine and how the Republicans are all war hawks and how 9/11 was an inside job. And none of that is not true today, right? Like all of that's still true, but they are two wings of the same bird, and they just go like this. Oh, we're Republicans now. Oh, now we're
Yeah.
Democrats. Oh no, and now we're flying away with all your money. Like that's how it is. I mean, it's just two wings of the same bird. And yeah, I think people, if they're, you know, certain type of person, they're always gonna fall back on authority. That's just the way it is. There's always going to be firefighters and cops and doctors and nurses, and those types of people, in most cases, they're going to fall on authority because they know their paycheck comes from authority, right? So
Mhm.
that group of people, I think they're maybe waking up a little bit more again in those states where they're seeing things affect them politically that maybe they could ignore earlier. But yeah, it's weird. The more connected people are and the better off they are, I think the less they care about any of this stuff. I think the more people start to get affected and their livelihoods change, they're going to start to wake up because they're going to say, why am I making less money and spending more?
Mhm.
That's what happens every time we have a president in office who's a Democrat. Why? Like, why does that happen? I mean, I remember, like, I wasn't even like that big of a fan of Trump. I thought he was interesting and somebody who got way more flack than any other president ever in the history of presidents. But I appreciated the low gas prices and the money I was making. Like shit, like 4 years ago was great compared to
Mhm.
now. So yeah, I think people are definitely waking up right now. And it's like disaster capitalism always happens when there's a Democrat in office. There's always some big disaster that FEMA sweeps in and they save everybody, and then all the money goes to not the people who need it. And
Mhm.
what happens? There's people at private galas getting champagne on a silver platter, and they're laughing about how they made so much money and didn't have to pay taxes on it. And oh, we're so heroic and valiant because we saved those people in Louisiana, or we saved
Mhm.
these people in Ohio, or they didn't save anybody. There's still people after Hurricane Katrina who lost their home and have no home. They're homeless, right? So
Or like, what are those people going to do with $700? There's no store or nothing left there for them to even buy the supplies they need
Mhm.
without shelter. Like, it's the dumbest shit ever.
right, right. And that FEMA stuff, yeah, Katrina happened when Bush was in office, but that FEMA stuff, I think that all got kicked off either by Bush or by Clinton.
I think it
So
was.
it doesn't matter Republican or Democrat. They're all part of this, group of people that I think they're trying to destroy America. I mean, it
Mhm.
sounds extreme, but I think they're trying to at least destroy the Constitution so that we can be like people in Europe or people in China who have less rights. And maybe they're happier because they have wealth or whatever. But I think, America set the table for what it looks like to be a free country, and you can't walk back on that. Like, we've made America and France, can't leave France out because they had a revolution too. But America and France have changed the world in that way. And other countries, even in Asia and Africa and South America, have followed that lead and written their own constitutions with their own human rights backing that up. So we can't let the elites degrade that with their phony baloney UN League of Nations bullshit.
But the big thing, though, is we're the only nation that is allowed to have our guns. Those countries don't have the right to bear arms, and look at what's happening to them. That's why I'm just like, look, if you don't want guns, that's fine. Like I say libertarian, but I hate to say that because it sounds selfish when you look at like things libertarians are about, to a sense of degree. For me, it's like I love everybody. I don't care what you're doing. Don't fucking hurt people. And but once your freedoms affect my freedoms, I got a fucking problem. Because how how do you expect me to be accepting of everything that you want, but you're closed minded to what others want, type deal?
Right.
Yeah. So I don't know. I don't know if that's libertarian. I don't know what it is. I just say it's independent.
Yeah, yeah. I don't like to identify. I've been to a libertarian festival, Pork Fest, and I was a
Oh,
little
bitches.
uncomfortable
Good
with
food.
No, porcupine, not pork.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, there's a
The
Barbecue,
bacon.
like I'm there.
yeah. No, maybe that's in Texas, but I'm
Well,
sure they
you're a
have that somewhere.
vegetarian though too, right?
No, no, but I talk like one. But no,
One time though, you were like for a minute.
yeah, I've tried
Okay.
it,
Okay.
but no, not anymore. But yeah, so Porcupine Fest is like a libertarian festival in New Hampshire, which is like a libertarian state basically. And there are a lot of like AK-47s and stuff there that I was like, I didn't have a gun, so I was a little uncomfortable. But if I had my own gun, I might be more comfortable. But so I'm not knocking it, but it is a weird group of people for sure, like libertarians.
Plus, I feel like any group too, intelligence infiltrates it from the inside out, and that's usually what destroys.
Right. Well, yeah, I think any political movement can be co-opted. I think secret societies essentially started off as good things,
Yeah,
but bad people get involved with them and use it for power. Use it to take power and absolute power corrupts absolutely, right? That's the one of the I think
yeah.
that's from the Bible. I said before I haven't read much of it, so I should though. I really should.
Good.
Yeah,
It,
so
it's like those institutions are institutions of sociopathy.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Marisol. I'm sorry.
no, yeah, I'm just wanted to thank you so much, Mark, for having us. And this was like such a good conversation. Um, I've always been so curious about the Skull and Bones and what's going on there. And then just wrapping it up with like current events and everything. It was just such a good conversation. Thank you so much. Where can our listeners find you? What's the latest that you have out? How can they follow up?
Thank you both. Thank you, Marisol. Thank you, Frank. Great to meet you both. And my family thinks I'm crazy.com is the best place to start. You can listen to the podcast anywhere. We don't have all of our episodes on YouTube because YouTube suppresses certain topics. So I only put certain episodes on YouTube. But all the videos go to Rockfin. And then for what's latest or what I would like people to check out if they're particularly interested in New Haven and the conversation we had today, I have a PDF available that people could buy and pick up, and it has a lot of information about New Haven, the secret societies, and it shows all this different architecture and the symbols that they're using in that architecture. So, hey, if you're like me and you're curious about this stuff, you can maybe use my guide of New Haven to sort of look or set you in the right direction wherever you live. Like, don't think of it necessarily as a guide for people who are only interested in New Haven. It's really just like an example of what anyone can do, examining where they're from, and New Haven just happens to be an interesting place. So yeah, Strange New Haven is the name of that, and it's all available on my website. There are links, so it's just easier to send people to the website.
Awesome, man. Thank you. Same thing with YouTube. We had a different name and we ended up changing it because we were uh, kicked off of YouTube for talking about the P family. And so it was a big thing. And so we were like, okay, well, we'll change the name and start a new one.
Love it. Yeah, well, hey, I mean, that's the great thing about where we're at now is they can't censor podcasts, and there's like 4 or 5 different replacements for YouTube where people go because they know YouTube is censoring. So those are the type of people we want to listen, have listening to our show anyways, right? So yeah, I would say get on Rumble, Odyssey, Rockfin. YouTube's great to find certain people, but yeah, I think you guys had the right idea changing the name. And yeah, maybe if you haven't already, put it on all those other platforms too, because yeah, I think things are changing. But this has been great. Thanks for having me. I
Thank
appreciate
you
it.
so much, man.
Cool.
Thank you.
Love you, brother.